The first thing I did when we claimed the plant was tape a paper map to the wall of the control room and draw red lines for anything that could kill us by accident. The river intake, the backwash drains, the chlorine room with its warning placards and valves with stems that did not like surprises. I wrote names by each hazard so it would never be just my head making calls. Mara for the fence and watch rotation. Luis for generators and panels. Dr. Singh for chemistry. Harper for medical. Pavel for welding and anything with a flame. Reed for pipe work. I took the rest and tried to keep it all breathing. We put the map in a plastic sleeve and screwed it to the wall. No one touched it unless I was there. That rule stayed. We did not break rules that could flood us or gas us. We were careful because careful is what lives when luck runs out. We turned the big filtration hall into a neighborhood. The circular basins became round apartments with catwalks and railings. We strung laundry lines between flocculators. We set cots on the platforms and kept boots off any valve handles. At night, the place hummed with generator sound and the slow churn of water, a steady noise that kept us from hearing the city beyond the fence. We ate in shifts. We checked the river in daylight and kept the east gate welded so no truck could smash in without warning. Everyone learned where the emergency showers were and how to pull the chain without thinking. We practiced the drill for a chlorine leak until even the kids who found us could run it half asleep. The world outside fought over food. We fought to keep water clean and boring. Trade came early. A team from the library brought a handcart of canned peaches and blankets for 2 barrels of treated water. A family from the firehouse wheeled in a dead lawnmower and rolled out with 4 jerry cans and a promise of diesel from a sealed tank on their roof. We built a small platform at the loading dock with a wall and a window where I sat behind a hinged steel plate and weighed deals with a clipboard. Clean water had weight. No one argued when I set limits. When someone did, Mara stood behind me with the old police shield and did not blink. It stayed civil. We kept it that way by never promising what we could not deliver. The only number that did not sit right was the level in the Clearwell reservoir. The float gauge dipped a 1/4 inch every night. Nothing was running, no backwash, no draw to city mains because the city mains were broken under collapsed streets. We checked for valve bleed-through and found nothing. Reed and I locked out the pumps and tagged them with bright plastic so no one would flip something out of habit. Still, the level dropped. A 1/4 inch became a half. It was enough for me to stop smiling at the window and start sleeping on a cot in the control room with the laptop open to the SCADA screen even though half the sensors were blind and the other half lied after lightning struck last month. I delayed the intake check longer than I wanted because the river had changed. It moved slower, choked with branches and junk that bounced off our trash racks with a hollow knock. The last time anyone waded out there, something gray had held under the crossbeams in the shadow of the rack and reached up. Pavel hit it from the catwalk with a rebar hook until it let go. After that, we used the long rake and we never leaned over the rail. When the level drop hit 3 inches, I could not justify waiting. We did the prep the way I wrote it. Daylight only, 3 on the catwalk with poles, 2 on the platform with rifles, 1 in the control room on the radio counting minutes. I checked the valve tags again. I took a light, a backup light, a hammer, and a length of rope I did not expect to need but took anyway because I am not proud. And I respect the way tunnels play games with time. The intake tunnel ran from the river screen to a gate chamber under the plant. The concrete was old but honest. It smelled like wet stone and algae. Reed went first with the light because his shoulder still worked after a fall last winter when mine did not. I walked with my hand on the wall, counting joints where I knew anchor bolts lived under the surface. We moved slow and called out anything that did not belong. There was the usual: scum lines, grit, a candy wrapper from a crew that quit long before the sirens. Then the floor changed under the light. The troweled concrete ended. The next 10 feet were not concrete at all. The surface looked chewed. The beams showed rough gouges pulled in arcs, small at first, then longer, then deep enough that Reed sank to his ankle. He pulled free and rolled his pant leg up to the knee. The skin was not cut. It had scraped over something coarse. He looked at me. I crouched and touched the ridge with a gloved finger. It crumbled. Not concrete. Clay. The tunnel ended in a hole wide enough for a person to crawl through if a person did not care about skin or sound bones. The edges were scalloped. I have worked with rats in basements and raccoons in culverts. I have not seen human teeth make marks on clay before, but the edges of that hole told a story. Shallow arcs at first, then deeper, then organized in bands where mouths worked the same line for hours. Some places had finger gouges where nails tore at the softened wall. Some arcs were small, child small. None of it was old. The clay still held a sheen. Water seeped through from the other side and ran down into the footprint Reed left. The clear well did not drop because of a valve. It bled into a handmade passage that went somewhere under the road. I felt a draft push my cheek when Reed's light moved away. The tunnel breathed with the river in a way it had never done. Reed stepped back. He did not speak until we were both on solid concrete. He said we would need a cage there and we would need it before sundown. He said it once. I nodded. We backed out without turning our backs on the hole, and we walked fast when the light found the gate chamber and the ladder up to air that did not smell like old wet. Mara met us at the top and did not ask for a speech. She looked at the dirt on our boots and sent Pavel for steel mesh and a bucket of anchors. I told Dr. Singh to cut dose on the next batch because I did not want to waste chlorine on water that might be heading into the ground. I told Luis to keep both generators warm. I told Harper to move the cots away from the chlorine room in case we needed to pull mask drills for real. No one argued. The map got a new red line. We built the first cage over the hole with speed and care that came from long practice. Pavel drilled in a circle while Reed held the hammer, and I held the shop light so the beam never wavered. We drove anchor bolts and hung 2 layers of steel mesh with a sandwich of chain link between them. Pavel welded the seams even though sparks bit the wet floor and ran away in tiny worms of steam. We set a second panel behind the first with a 3-inch gap so fingers could not find purchase on a single plane. It would not stop a truck. It would stop hands and mouths. For the night, that was enough. At dusk, we stood on the river catwalk and watched the flow darken. A log snagged the trash rack and spun. Something pale drifted against it and did not spin. Pavel worked the long rake and teased the log loose. The pale thing floated free. It drifted past the pier and rolled once. The face had no color. The jaw hung wrong. The eyes tracked the catwalk until the current took it into deeper water. Reed leaned against the rail and said nothing. I checked the wind and the river level and said we would not run pumps tonight. The clear well needed the head. If we were losing water into the ground, I would slow the loss any way I could. We would run at daylight with full watch. We would find a way to plug that hole in a way that did not turn the tunnel into a trap for us first. Trade still came in the morning. A teacher with a wagoneer pushed a crate of candles and asked for water for her group in the old post office. She kept her eyes on the ground while she spoke because the world had learned to show smaller shapes in front of fences. She did not ask why my hands shook when I weighed the lids. I gave her an extra can and told her to tell her group to boil anything taken from roof barrels. She nodded and repeated the word boil, as if she was teaching a child to wash hands. She left. I closed the window and felt the map behind me like a person in the room. We planned the plug in the chemical room with the big table because it had the best light. Dr. Singh wanted a non-shrink grout with fibers. Reed wanted rebar dowels. Pavel wanted a welded faceplate we could drop against the mesh and brace from the sides. Luis wanted a camera where the mesh sat so we would not work blind. Mara wanted 2 rifles on the ladder and 1 at the gate chamber every minute we were down there. I wanted all of that, and a way to flood the hole if something pulled at the mesh while we worked. We drew it all and then cut back half because we did not have enough hands to be perfect. We settled on anchors drilled around the circumference, rebar set in epoxy, a layer of bent mesh wrapped into the opening. Then a grout plug poured in lifts. It would not be fast. It would be strong enough if we got through the first hour. We staged by noon. The sun had burned off the river mist. The gate chamber smelled of oil and old water. The rope I had not expected to need went over a beam and held the camera Luis had scavenged from an old security kit. He wired it to the laptop at the top of the ladder. The picture showed the mesh, wet and dull, the hole behind it darker than anything. Reed carried the hammer. Pavel carried the drill. I carried the bucket with epoxy cartridges and a bag of rebar cut at an angle so the tips would bite. Mara dropped into the chamber last with the rifle and took a knee at the foot of the ladder. She kept her muzzle low and her eyes on the mesh. Harper stood above her with a mask bag in case the wet mix kicked up anything ugly and we needed air fast. We used hand signals because the tunnel turned voices into noise that never went away. The camera made the first hour bearable. When Pavel drilled, dust rained on the mesh, and the picture turned to snow until he stopped, and the seep rinsed it away. Reed slid rebar into holes, and I smacked them home with a short-handled sledge that sent a ring into the concrete. I worked epoxy with slow squeezes because the tubes were old and did not like sudden pressure. We wrapped the inner edge with a roll of mesh that cut my gloves. Pavel swore under his breath when a bit snapped inside the concrete, and he had to knock it out with a punch and a prayer. Mara did not move. Luis counted minutes on the radio and called out when an hour passed, so we would take a breath and check each other's hands and eyes for mistakes. We did not rush. We acted like we had all the time in the world, while every second said otherwise. The first sound from inside the hole was not a sound I could point to. It was the way the mesh bowed a finger's width and held there as if someone on the other side leaned without knowing what a lean would do. The camera caught the movement and showed nothing else. Pavel stopped drilling and lifted the hammer. Reed put a hand on my arm and eased the epoxy gun down so the tip would not smear across the wet metal. Mara raised the rifle a hair and sighted along the barrel. The mesh eased back to flat. Water seeped in slow again. Reed held his breath by habit, then let it go in a slow stream so I could hear it and remember that breathing was allowed. I squeezed epoxy again. We kept working. By late afternoon, the rebar ring set. We began the grout. We mixed in a clean trash can with a paddle Reed made from a shovel and a piece of pipe. Dr. Singh measured powder with a coffee can so the ratio stayed consistent. The bag said 20 minutes to initial set. We planned on 30 because cold water buys you time, and I will always pay for time when I can. We heaved the first lift against the mesh and troweled it into the gaps. It sagged and held. It looked wrong until I remembered that almost everything we built in this new life looked wrong halfway through. We built anyway. The second sound was clear. Fingernails on mesh. Not the scrape of a tool. A rattle and a quick drag across steel as if the person behind it did not understand that metal can cut. It came from the lower right corner where the hole dipped under the floor line. The mesh moved half an inch. The camera picture flickered where a finger pressed across the lens, gone too fast for a face to follow. Reed did not jump. He swung the hammer and hit the mesh near the pressure point, not to hurt anything but to send a message that there was no easy path. The pressure eased. A small smear of something pale hung on the wire. It washed away in the seep. Dr. Singh whispered that we were almost there. I shoved the trowel hard and packed the corner with grout until my wrist ached. We had a way to flood the chamber if things went bad. The backwash valve sat behind my shoulder, locked and tagged. It would give us dirty water from a filter basin, not raw river, but dirty beets empty. We ran a hose to the hole and ran the other end back to a T on the backwash line with a ball valve we could work by hand. It was a crude thing. It would work if the mesh came out of the wall and we had to choose between a rush of water and whatever could fit through that chewed ring. I did not want to use it. I kept my hand near it because wanting has nothing to do with turning a handle when turning a handle keeps you here. The face came at dusk. It pressed hard against the mesh and turned sideways so one eye could look into the camera. The skin was gray with water and grit. The eyelids were torn at the edges as if sand had worked them raw. The mouth opened and closed. Teeth struck wire and slipped. The jaw slid left and popped. The eye did not blink. It held on the lens and then drifted left as more weight pressed from the side. A second face did not appear. A shoulder blade did. The shoulder blade worked in little jerks, as if the person it belonged to had learned to pull like a seal on a dock line. The mesh creaked. Reed swung the hammer again, hard this time, not on the face, not to show anger, but on the wire to tell the wall that we remembered how to make it sing. Mara did not shoot, because a rifle in that chamber would turn our ears to mud for a day. She raised the butt and wrapped the bar over the mesh in time with Reed's hits. The impact rang through the tunnel and into whatever mind pressed on the other side. The pressure eased a hand's width. We poured the last lift while the faces shoved and slid and tried to find seams with lips and teeth. The grout flowed into the mesh and set with a dull sheen. We smoothed the surface with a trowel and left a rough key for a final thin coat in the morning. Reed set one last bar across the face of the plug and bent it into hooks we could catch with a plate later if we had to. Pavel welded those hooks to the anchor frame while I held the shield between his torch and the mesh in case a hand found its way through. Sparks hit the shield, and the room smelled like burnt rain. The light on the camera washed out, and then returned. The eye was gone. The hole behind the mesh turned into a dark mirror. We backed out slow. No one climbed the ladder until I touched each valve tag again and said the names out loud. Intake gate closed, backwash closed, clear well isolation closed, chlorine room closed and unbothered. We left the rope and the camera for the night. Luis promised to sit with the laptop until dawn and call out any movement. He drank black coffee without sugar and did not pretend it tasted fine. He did not leave the screen. I gave him the extra blanket and told him to wrap his feet because cement pulls heat and does not give it back. He nodded and kept watching. Night brought wind from the river that rattled the drum lids in the yard. We cut the generator at midnight to save fuel and let the small diesel run the control room and the lights over the gate chamber. The rest of the plant went dim. In the quiet, the city reached us again. Faint metal clanks from far streets, a siren with no one to hear it. A voice calling a name and then stopping because names do not work anymore when maps change. I lay on the cot by the SCADA screen and watched the level in the Clearwell hold steady for the first time in days. I checked twice. I let my eyes close. Not a full sleep. Just the kind where a sound can grab you and put you on your feet with your boots in your hand before your head wakes up. Around 1 a.m, Luis called softly on the radio. A scrape, a slow push. He did not add panic to it. He gave me the time and said it again. I went to the ladder with Mara. The laptop showed the plug, damp and dull. Something worked at the edge with a stick. The stick slid and tapped the lens. It fell. A hand followed. The hand did not reach through the mesh. It patted the surface as if searching for a seam to worry with nails. The nails were broken. The hand withdrew. There was a sound, not a voice, not speech, more a wet draw of air through a mouth that had forgotten how to shape words. Then nothing. We watched for an hour. It did not return. The level stayed. We waited for dawn. Morning came red through the high windows. We checked the plug and found it firm enough to take the next coat. We skimmed it clean and pressed a thinner layer over the face until it looked like it had grown from the wall and not from our fear. Reed knocked it with his knuckles and nodded. He does not hand out nods for free. Pavel wanted the plate anyway. I agreed. We cut a rectangle of steel and drilled 4 holes and hung it on the hooks with a wedge, so that if anything slammed from the far side, the plate would ring and remind whatever lived out there that we had a second skin. We left the camera. We did not say finished. We said the next thing. There is always a next thing when you build hope in a place that never asked for it. Trade that day was heavy. The word had moved. People came from streets I had not walked in months. A man in a suit jacket with mortar dust on the cuffs rolled a wheelbarrow of bricks to our wall and asked if he could stack them anywhere safe because he did not want to see those bricks in a barricade pointed at us later. He had nothing to trade beyond the cart and a story about how his daughter loved the fountain at the park. We filled 2 cans for him, and he took them without lifting his eyes. I put the bricks by the east gate inside the fence and wrote his name on the cart with chalk so he could find it again. He might not. I wrote it anyway. The problem did not end with the plug. The water drops stopped, yes, but something had learned our smell. That night, a small group pressed the river screen. We saw them from the catwalk head-on in the spill of the dawn sun. 3 stood waist-deep and pushed the rack with both hands while the current tried to carry them under. Their clothes hung like rags, their mouths opened and closed with the cold. A 4th crawled on the crossbeam as if it had practiced in a place with ladders. We did not shoot unless we had to. Steel and water were our weapons. Pavel worked the rake and broke the grip on the crossbeam. The crawler slipped and the current took it against the rack, then down into the deeper pool where the eddy spins and holds anything unlucky. It disappeared after 2 turns. The others kept pushing. We opened the scouring valve on the approach and sent a pulse across the face of the rack. It hit them hard in the knees. They went down. 2 did not come up. The last one clung for a time that had no reason in it and then let go. We shut the valve and stood there in the wind until the river smoothed. Reed counted our rakes and hooks and coiled the rope again and said we needed to brace the rack before winter. I said yes. We set it on the list. We spent the afternoon hardening what we had. Pavel welded a lip on the catwalk so a foot would not slip. Mara set tripwire cans along the fence that jingled at the touch. Luis ran the small generator on a strict timer and checked the load with a meter that had a cracked face. Dr. Singh adjusted the chlorine dose down to save supply after new tests showed the river colder and cleaner than last week. Harper logged vaccinations from the old clinic fridge that still worked when we started it on the generator once a week. We lived in lists. Lists kept minds from running old movies of streets and birthdays. A list gives a person a place to stand. Late that night, a ripple passed through the plant. Not a sound. A change in the way air moved. The kind of thing you notice only when you have counted drips for weeks. Luis felt it first in the control room where the fan stopped its hiccup every 9th cycle. He called me. We stood under the duct and waited. The hiccup did not return. He tapped the gauge with one finger and frowned. We went to the intake. The camera showed the plug. It held. The plate held. The mesh held. The seep around the edge had slowed. I ran a hand over the wall next to the plug. The concrete felt cooler than the rest of the chamber. That meant groundwater collected on the far side, backing against our work, looking for a new path. Reed ran the math aloud. If water could not go through us, it might go around us. He pointed to the joint where the intake tunnel met the gate chamber. Old construction, a cold joint. I tasted rust at the back of my throat from memory and not from air. We would need to cut a relief for that pressure, or the river would do it for us. We drilled a weep hole at the top of the wall into the rock behind the joint. A slow thread of clean water ran out. Not much. Enough to tell us we were right. We piped it to a bucket and then to a drain so it would not pool where we needed to kneel. The pressure eased. The air in the chamber felt right again. We left the weep with a small valve so we could close it later. The plant taught us a lesson I already believed. You do not win by sealing everything. You win by giving water a path that does not drown you. Days settled into a new normal. We ran pumps in daylight only with 2 on the catwalk and 2 in the gate chamber. The clear well stayed fat. Trade lined up at the window with people who knew to speak in short sentences because I did not have time to hear about cousins or old dogs. I let a man talk about his dog anyway and slipped him an extra half can because I saw his hands shake, and I have a dog in a picture frame in a locker I do not open. I am not a priest. I am an engineer who can still count the cost of kindness on one hand and keep a plant alive with the other. Then the ground vibrated. Not from planes, not from trucks. Short pulses that rattled dust from the rafters. We ran to the yard expecting a storm. The sky sat clean. The pulses came from underfoot. Reed looked at me, and I looked at the map in my head where the intake tunnel ran under the road and the storm drain met the old creek bed that the city buried in pipe. If something had learned to dig toward water behind our plug, then the path with the least resistance would be the old brick culvert that sloped in from the east. No one had opened that manhole in 20 years because the city had poured a parking lot over it. The quake came again, a short run of knocks like someone swinging a post against stone in rhythm and not stopping when knuckles skinned. We did not wait for the next one. We took the truck to the east fence gate and swung it wide. The old service road buckled where willow roots pushed up the asphalt. At the top of the grade, the land flattened into the dead lot with fading yellow lines under dirt. The manhole cover sat under a crust of soil and weeds. It had once been painted red. Now it was the color of neglect. We cleared it with shovels. Pavel hooked the ring and we counted off and lifted. It did not move. We levered it an inch, then 2, the smell of swamp and thyme hitting us like a coat you forgot you owned. We propped it and peered in. The culvert ran in brick, oval, and tight, with a trickle of water at the bottom. The knocks came again, not from below us, but farther along in the dark. Reed slid the light in. The beam caught dust and a shape moving slow, as if it had no room to swing. A hand came into view, not reaching, carrying a piece of rebar. The hand rose and dropped the bar against the wall in that same steady rhythm, testing the brick and listening to the change in sound at each joint. Another hand took the bar and did the same. We had two choices: close the manhole and weld it shut, or meet what was coming on ground of our choosing. We chose the second, because the first would only buy a day. The culvert led almost straight to the gate chamber. If they broke through there, we would fight in the worst possible place. If we fought here, we had air and room and the sun. Mara took position to the right of the hole with the shield, and her rifle slung on her back for last resort. Pavel stood left with a length of conduit and the hook. Reed kept the light on the hands. I knelt by the truck and unspooled the fire hose. The hydrant spigot on our outer tank still carried good pressure when the pump ran. Luis started the pump and shouted the number. I held the nozzle and waited for the right moment, because water in a tunnel has its own mind and will bounce back if you aim wrong. The first head rose at the lip, hair matted with brick grit. Eyes adapted to dark that hated daylight. The mouth opened and closed like a fish out of river. The rebar came up, a slow seesaw motion from someone whose shoulder had forgotten how to move without pain. I angled the nozzle down and to the side so the stream would sweep along the bottom and lift, not punch straight. I opened the bale halfway and let the water climb the curve and strike the knees and hips in a rolling push. The head vanished. The rebar clanged on brick. The stream ran for 10 slow counts, and I closed the bale in steps so we would not hammer the hydrant. The knocks came again from deeper in. The bar hit faster now. Not one pair of hands, many. The sound made a simple math problem with an ugly answer. We could not stand here and sweep all day. Fuel had numbers, pressure had limits. I told Reed to get the manhole lid ready. He set it on edge next to the hole. Pavel hooked the ring with the bar and set his feet. On the next knock, I opened the bale full and held it for 5 seconds. The stream cut through the oval and turned the trickle into a sheet that climbed the far wall and came back. I felt the hose stiffen and kick. I kept it aimed low. The next head that rose met water and vanished. I shut the bale. In that brief quiet, we dropped the lid and hammered it home. Pavel slid the hook out and nodded. Mara shot me a look that asked if the world would hold for 5 minutes. I gave a shrug that said it could try. We welded that lid in 3 places and set a 1/2-inch plate over it that we anchored to 4 drilled holes. It was not pretty. It would hold longer than we needed it to. We rolled the truck back down the grade, closed the fence, and posted 2 at the gate with a whistle and instructions to blow once for people, twice for river, 3 times for something no one had a word for yet. The knocks did not come again that day. The ground rested. We did not. In the evening, I walked the plant alone. I checked the bolts by hand and looked at each weld as if my eyes could find hairline failures. The basins turned slow and patient. The sand beds waited for their next backwash. The big clear well sat with a skin that reflected roof beams and the last of the sunlight. The map in the control room had more red lines than last week. I did not hate that. The lines did not mean fear. They meant we had learned. We wrote what we learned so the next person would not make our mistakes when my hands were tired or gone. I taped a new note at the bottom. Do not trust a quiet joint. Water always finds friends. We called the plant Hope because someone needed a word that was not a warning stenciled on a drum. It stuck by accident when the teacher with the wagoneer told a boy to drink slow and save some for morning. and he said this place tastes like hope. I am not a poet, but I understood what he meant. Hope here was not a feeling. It was a pump that starts when you turn the key. It was a test that reads safe when you count the drops. It was a plug in a wall with handprints on the other side that does not give even when the ground hums. It was the faces on the catwalk that learned to look past the river and not flinch at driftwood, because driftwood has no reason to hate us. 2 weeks after the plug, the teacher returned with a list. She had taken charge at the post office. She needed a schedule for pickups so fights would not start. She needed guidance on how to store water in a building with old paint and dust and pipes that had not seen attention in a decade. Dr. Singh and I walked back with her and looked at her rooms. We cleaned a corner and built a stand for barrels. We showed her how to boil first draws from taps and discard until lead lines cooled. We taught 2 teenagers to test with strips and write numbers on the wall. We made them promise to teach 2 more. We did not insist on payment beyond a stack of notebooks and a pack of dry erase markers for the control room. That trade felt right. On the way back, a man waved from a rooftop across the avenue and pointed with urgency toward the river. We climbed the ladder and followed his line of sight. On the far bank, near the old boathouse, a group gathered. Not on the shore. In the water, knee-deep, facing upstream, arms out. They did not move much. They stood as if the current needed their attention. Every minute one bent down, cupped water, and lifted it to a mouth. The hands shook. The water fell through fingers and splashed back. The faces had the same river-burnt look I had seen through the mesh. Dehydration had become a path and not a punishment. It led them here, to a place where they could hear water and not drink it in a way that would help. Some part of them still saw the river as a source. Some part had lost the knowledge of a cup. I watched until I felt my jaw clench. I climbed down without a speech. I went back to my plant and checked the clearwell valves again. Winter would come. The river would drop. Ice would form on the rack and pull at the welds. We braced it with beams and chains. We built a frame over the catwalk and hung tarps to cut wind. We sealed the chemical room better and moved cots away from the outer wall. We filled sandbags and tucked them into the culvert grade. We set out barrels with lids for rain. We did not waste a day on pride. We did not pretend we had solved our problem. We had only moved it from our door to the road. That counted. In this life, moving a problem 10 feet can give a kid 1 more week to sleep under a roof. On the first morning, the frost rimed the catwalk. Reed brought me a chipped mug with coffee that tasted like burnt toast, and hope in the practical sense. We stood over the clear well and watched our breath. He asked if I ever planned to leave. I said I did not plan anymore. I made outlines with margins, and the margins had notes that said some truths do not care about plans. He grunted in approval and sipped. He said he would not mind dying in a place that worked. I told him to go fix the light over Basin 3 because I hated the flicker, and it made me think of bad wiring. He laughed without a sound and walked away with his shoulders set right. The day the ice hit the rack, we were ready. We ran the scour in pulses to break the plates into slush. We did not lean over the rail. We kept harnesses clipped to the cable we had strung along the catwalk because a harness feels silly until the second you slip. The river took pieces and gave back others. A door floated by with a sticker for a band I had never liked. A blue plastic tub spun and then sank. A shape caught on the rack and hung there. I swung the rake and nudged it. It turned. Not a person. A deer. The eyes held a clouded glaze. Its coat was patchy from a disease older than our new one. We pushed it off and into the current. Reed said no stew tonight. It was the kind of joke that keeps hands from shaking when a different sight would turn a stomach. In the gate chamber, the camera showed the plug white with frost. The weep ran in a thin crystal string. The plate rang once when the temperature changed and the steel decided to speak. The mesh did not move. Whatever had pressed from the far side did not like cold any more than we did. That knowledge did not make me smug. It made me write a note for spring. Pressure returns when rivers rise. We would be ready. That is all hope means in a place like this. Not a promise, a posture, hands on tools, eyes on gauges, names on tags, the map waiting for the next red line that says we learned something before it cost a life. Visitors asked, sometimes in careful voices, if we had a name beyond the plant. I always said the name on the sign out front because I do not rename working things without a reason. But when we filled cans for people with chapped lips and children who carried empty jars with both hands, I heard them use the other word, hope. It rolled across the yard in low voices and made the fence feel taller. I did not correct them. Words can be tools. If calling this place by that name kept a fight from breaking out in line, I would paint it on the tank tomorrow. We kept the rhythm. Run, test, trade, repair, watch, sleep in shifts, practice drills, count fuel, teach, learn names, stand on the catwalk and do nothing beyond breathing while the river moved. I wrote a list on the back of the map. Things we would build when time allowed. A second screen upstream with a removable panel. A fish ladder turned into a collection trap for debris. A motorized rake. A small turbine on the outfall to trickle-charge batteries. A better shelter over the gate chamber, with heat. A real room for Harper that did not smell like chlorine. If a day came when those were not fantasies, we would be a different kind of town. At night, when the generator settled and the plant spoke only in water sounds, I walked once more to the gate chamber and looked at the plug. I touched the plate with my knuckles. I listened for the old rhythm of knocks. It did not come back. I imagined the culvert, wet and dark, full of silence and the slow patience of ground. I imagined hands giving up on the hard way and drifting down to the river where the current takes everything in the end. I did not spend long there. I did not bless the wall or curse the mines that pressed against it. I went back to the control room and checked the level one more time and wrote the number on the board. It held. I turned off the light and lay down in the cot and counted the steps from the door to the chlorine shutoff with my eyes closed. If you can count to the right valve in the dark, you have given yourself one more chance to see morning. The plant is still here. The map has thumbprints and grease smears and more red lines than any sane place should carry. The river keeps moving. The world outside the fence keeps making noise and then going quiet. We weld, we patch, we train, we drink, we give, we take, we write it down so the next person can read it, and not waste a day learning what we already paid for. We used to say clean water is more valuable than gold. That may be true in a way that fits a speech. The truth I hold is simpler. When a mother holds out a jar and you fill it, and she nods without speaking, you do not need a precious metal to feel the weight of what you built. You need a pump that starts, a wall that holds, and a name on a map that tells you where to stand when the ground hums. We called it hope. We still do. Not because the word rides on banners or in songs, but because we can point to the river, check the gauges, roll up our sleeves, and make the promise with actions that matter. If the ground starts to hum again tonight, I know who will grab the hammer, who will shoulder the hose, who will watch the camera, who will keep the children back from the rail, and who will write the new red line on the map. That is enough. That is our city now. That is our story, told in valves and steel and the simple fact that clean water still flows when we ask it to.